end of Lent, we're going to talk one more time about the wounds of existence that mark our lives and our world. And on salvation, it's the name for that which heals us or makes us whole. Salvation has to do with healing the wounds of existence, wrote New Testament scholar Marcus Borg, and this is no small matter, for the wounds of existence are many and deep. Some of them are inflicted on us, some are the result of our own doing, some we inflict on others. In today's scripture readings, it strikes me that we are confronted by our own limitations as fully human, fully mortal beings. I mean, it's one thing to talk about experiencing forgiveness, which has been one of the themes during Lent, or new ways of seeing, or finding a way home. All of those forms of salvation seem at least possible to us in some way. But there are some wounds that seem to not heal. Some forms of injustice and evil in the world that can't simply be wished away, or wiped away, or prayed away. When you are confronted with the death of a loved one, or with your own mortality, there's little you can do. You can grieve, you can rail against it, you can simply shut down. But you can't fix it, not entirely. It's a fact of our existence just as much as it is a wound of our existence. When you're confronted by giant social wounds, like the Holocaust, human slavery and apartheid, or the mass extinction of species on our planet that's taking place right now, there's little you can do to make that right. You can't bring back the dead from their mass graves. You can't undo the chains and the whippings and the lynchings. You can't bring the top of a mountain back, or a species that is no more. You can grieve. You can rail against it. You can simply shut down. But you can't fix those kinds of things, not on your own, and not entirely, not fully. There are, in the end, limits to our power, limits to our ability as fully human, fully mortal beings. And this isn't a very American thing to say. After all, we believe in self-made men. And women, I suppose. But the men are the ones who claim that for themselves, self-made men. We can pull ourselves up from our very own bootstraps. We can do anything when we put our minds to it. That's what we're told. That's what we've been telling ourselves. We can do anything when we put our minds to it, except when we can't. Except when we can't. Except when we're bowed down in grief outside the tomb because Jesus, the healer, didn't come in time. Except when we remember that our own time is limited too. Except when we stand before the valley of death, filled with all the dry bones of those we couldn't save, including ourselves. There are some things we cannot overcome on our own. It's hard to accept, but there are some things we can't overcome on our own. Not through the power of positive thinking, not through exercise or the latest diet. They might lengthen your life, that's true. But the other issue isn't totally solved. And not through the strongest resolve. Can these bones live? Only God knows. Only God knows. That is very much the human condition sometimes for us. That question and that answer. But the issue that's raised in these stories, as Alex suggested, the issue that's raised in these stories from the prophet Ezekiel and the Gospel of John is not simply the fact of our mortality or the reality of evil in the world. These readings are concerned with something more present and more pressing to us. How to live in the face of those harsh facts of our existence. Whether or not we can live. Especially whether or not we can live with any faith or hope or love in our lives. Can these bones live? Can I live in the face of all these things? Facing us, facing me. In today's scripture, the answer depends on two things. It's important to remember Ezekiel was a prophet born in exile. He saw his people slaughtered, enslaved, and sent away to Babylon. It would be as if he were a prophet in Syria right now, perhaps. He lived through the complete destruction of Jerusalem, never saw the return of his people to their homeland, never. died in exile. And he was in many ways a man without hope, a man who was forced to confront the limitations of his own power, his life, and his times. For this reason, a good portion of his prophetic message is actually weird if you read it. There's a lot of strange imagery in Ezekiel. But a good portion of it also had to do with God's judgment and what went wrong with his own people. He just struggled with it. And struggled with whether or not they would ever live again as a people. Then in today's story from the Gospel of John, Martha and Mary are without hope too. They live in an oppressed land too, but that's not the subject of this particular story. Just when they needed him most, Jesus wasn't there. And now, days after the death of their brother, nothing could be done but grieve. Even when Jesus tells them, take away the stone, Martha said simply, Lord, it's too late. There's a stench because he's been dead for 4 days. Talk about limitations. That's an all too earthy reminder of the reality of human mortality. We are but dust and ashes after all. Yet it's not the death of our bodies that concerns the Scriptures. It's the death of our spirits. It's the shutting down of our hearts. It's whether or not our lives are animated by the life and spirit of God. The place to see ourselves in these stories is not just in Mary and Martha and Ezekiel, not necessarily even in them. The vision from Ezekiel is clear. God said, mortal, these bones are the whole house of Israel. These bones are the people of God. That's where we are in the story. They say our bones are dried up and our hope is lost and we are cut off completely. And so it is with us sometimes. The fear of death in all of its forms silences us, numbs us, stifles us. The fear of scarcity, poverty, lack of opportunity, change and loss, disease, rejection, ridicule, shame, the loss of family or community. The fear of the authorities, of violence, and yes, death itself often overwhelm our sense of possibility and lead to lives of apathy, numbness, listlessness, restless distraction, doubt, and disempowerment. We are the dry bones of God's people scattered across the valley in this story, disembodied, spiritless, voiceless, powerless. We are Jesus' friend and follower, already decaying inside the tomb, lost to this world, while the community outside grieves our death and the threat of death which constantly hangs over the world. Can these bones live? That is God's question to us. Can these bones live? The answer from Ezekiel, the answer that God gives to Ezekiel is yes. Yes, but not through anything we can do on our own. This is one of those places in our lives when we have to acknowledge our utter dependence on the one who is the source of life and all things. This is one of those places where we have to give ourselves over to the care and power and life of God. Facing the fact of our own limitations, we can only place ourselves, our lives, and our time in God's hands, trusting the power of life that courses through all things and that is alive in us. We say our bones are dried up and our hope is lost. We are cut off completely, but God responds, I'm going to raise you up. And God is not just talking about the last day, as Jesus said to Martha. God is not just talking about something at the end of time. God is talking about now. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. And God said, I am going to raise you up. I will put my spirit within you and you shall live. This is the power of life which only God can give. This is inspiration in its most literal form, the power of the Spirit breathing in us, moving in us, and moving upon us. And all we have to do, all we really can do, is open ourselves to that power in deep trust. Even then, even after you're called out of the tomb by God, called forth from the tombs of human existence like Lazarus, we're still just dead men walking, still bound by death and still wrapped in the shroud of death. And it's quite an image of Lazarus coming out of the tomb and he's still completely wrapped. He can't do anything. He can't unwrap himself. His face is wrapped, his arms are bound to his body by the shrouds of death. Unbind him, Jesus says, and let him go. So the second thing we need for this form of salvation is others. We need others. We need spiritual community. We need one another to unbind us, to unbind one another, and to let us go. With our presence and our touch, with our sharing and our caring, we can offer hope to one another. We can offer hope to those who are in despair, create connections for those who are isolated, bring healing to those who are in pain, knowing that in our reaching out to one another, we will be changed and healed too. This is why we gather to worship each week. This is why we gather at this table for communion. It's why we seek to serve together. It's why we seek to walk together and share our spiritual journeys with one another. To help each other unravel the things which bind our lives, which we cannot do on our own. Our self-doubts, our hopelessness, our isolation, our fears, our shame, our sense of powerlessness. With every sharing of our lives with one another, with every act of care for one another, we begin to unbind each other, to unwrap the cloth of death that holds us, even when we've been made alive again. Can these bones live? Can all these bones out here live? Yes, they can. Even in the face of all the dark facts of human existence that I named earlier, these bones can live. Our lives can be full of the power of God's life. That's the message of the Scriptures today. But only when we choose to open our hearts to God and to one another in the deep trust of the Spirit.